Beloved, I beg of you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. That's 1 Peter 2:11-15. We were talking about that in men's group today, and it is a big conversation about when to submit to the ruling authorities. You look at the life of Daniel, you look at the life of Jesus. They were willing to take unjust wrath to glorify their Father in heaven. And that's what we're called to do. But there is a line, because, right, we know what we're trending towards. The mark of the beast is something that will be imposed if you love the world more than you love God. You are going to have to take a mark to be able to buy or sell. We're trending in that direction right now. That is something we're not to take. So when the world tells us to do something that is not in line with what God says, then a rightful defiance is in order. Daniel, the council that conspired against him to have him eventually thrown into the lion's den, knew that he prayed every day facing Jerusalem, and they tricked the king into making a decree that anyone who prayed openly that direction should be taken in and murdered. Capital punishment for prayer. So he did it anyway, because he knew that's what he was called to do, to pray to his God, to worship his God. And ultimately God protected him in the lion's den. So there are evil men and wicked rulers in place that will have us doing things that we don't want to do. But the only way we can show that we are followers of God and have a Christ-like presence and allow people to see God in us and thereby glorify God in our lives is to submit to unjust authority when it doesn't have us violating God's law. If it's just things that make us uncomfortable or that are unfair, Daniel didn't want to go into slavery when Nebuchadnezzar took over, or one king after another, but he continued that 70 years of slavery, and he submitted to whoever was there, and he respectfully asked, can I change my meal? Like, I don't want to eat what you're feeding everyone else. He didn't want to eat the defiled meat, and he only ate vegetables. And then the king saw that, oh wow, that food that they're eating is having a positive effect. But he did it humbly, respectfully, and he won favor. If we are to reflect the love of Christ on others who hate us and persecute us for that love, they need to see the goodness in us, and that will, what's the scripture say? Silence the ignorance of foolish men, because they foolishly persecute those who are trying to honor the Most High God through Jesus Christ, and they do not realize what they're doing. That's why Jesus said on the cross, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So we have to have that mentality, forgive them, for they know not what they do, in order for the love of Christ to be seen through us in a world that hates anyone who stands up for Christ. That's what the whole political divide, the cultural divide, that's what everything else is trying to exacerbate right now, is to make people hate anyone who's willing to stand up for Christ. And it wants to provoke a response that will show you not being humble and good as Christ was. It wants to make you angry. And I have to fight this every day. I think we all do to some degree. When we start responding as the world responds, in anger, with a vengeance-minded, attitude, we're not showing the love of Christ. As hard as that is, thank God for his grace, because we're not going to be perfect. We're going to respond poorly sometimes. But the more we are focused on Christ, as we see times being flipped upside down, the more we can be a piece of light and a piece of salt, so people can see little glimpses of Christ when we do humbly submit in circumstances that are not fair, that we want to wage war against, but we submit in honor of Christ to glorify him, because that's exactly what he did for us on his way to and on the cross, all the way up to his resurrection from the grave and his ascension to heaven. And that is the pathway that we all will take when we submit to the Lord. So remember that life is not going to be fair. We weren't promised a fair stay here in this earth, in these fleshly vehicles. All of the world is saying equality and equity and everyone should have this, but it's a reverse paradigm, because the only time we will have equality and true equity and everything that goes around is in heaven. But the God of this world wants to trick everybody into believing the controlling authorities of this world that we can have that here. But we can't have that here when the controlling authorities are manipulating the masses into submitting all of their free will to what will ultimately be an antichrist spirit and one world ruler. And that's when it's too late. But the grace of God is never but a repentant moment away. I talked yesterday about the climate change and all that. All of those things are plans of the authorities of this world, because they know what's coming. So they know how to write current history around it, to blend truth with lies. So anyway, again, submitting to authorities, but not losing the grace, being willing to take unfair justice or lack of justice in order to represent Christ. But sometimes when it comes to the things that were injected, the things that were imposed upon us, we have a choice. We can love the world and choose to love the world, or we can make huge sacrifice. We can make huge sacrifices. Sometimes people have to sacrifice their jobs and trust in the Lord that he will provide in order to not take things that they feel are unjust. So there is that choice. There's an abuse of free will going on through massive manipulation. But the more faith you have, the more you'll be willing to go out on a limb in faith and make those difficult choices that seem to separate you from the world, but really are a step inward to faith and under the protective umbrella of the grace of God through Jesus Christ. So I pray this finds you well. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow.